In this video, we'll be talking about the carbon cycle. We'll be looking at how carbon moves from the ground up into the air, vice versa, how carbon gets back into the soil and in some cases gets trapped underground for literally millions of years, and also how carbon dioxide from the air dissolves in water and the effects that can have on living organisms. Here is a simplification of the carbon cycle with a few of the key steps I want to emphasize. One of them is these two opposing processes that are performed by living things. One of those we've talked about already is photosynthesis. With photosynthesis, what's happening is plants are pulling carbon dioxide out of the air, and they're bringing that down into the plant tissue itself. So it's pulling carbon dioxide out. And then we have what's called cellular or cell respiration. Here they just say respiration, but more precisely we should call it cellular respiration. That's performed by all living things, and that releases carbon dioxide into the air. What I also want to point out is that sometimes, under certain conditions, fossil fuels are formed. And when fossil fuels are formed, we have carbon that gets stored in those substances. So let's talk a little bit about fossil fuels. When you hear this term, you should think of these three different things: coal, oil, also called petroleum, and natural gas. Those are the three primary fossil fuels. We excavate these, burn them to generate electricity. As a byproduct, there are a number of gases that are also released. The one that we'll focus on is CO2, which we call carbon dioxide. So how is it that fossil fuels are actually formed? Well, there are three key forces that must be at play: high heat, pressure, and millions of years of time. So we consider fossil fuels to be non-renewable resources because even though they are replaced, it takes millions of years. So for all intents and purposes, they're not useful in terms of considering them replaceable because it takes so long. Besides those forces, you also need something for these forces to act upon. And what that is you need organisms that have died, but that were not completely decomposed. If they completely decomposed, they'd be broken down to their most basic elements, and there'd be nothing left to convert into a fossil fuel. So what happens is when they die, as you can see over here in this first box, they get buried. This could happen in an ocean, a swamp, many different scenarios. They get covered with sand, silt, and rock, and those remains get converted through pressure and high heat over millions of years into fossil fuels: coal, oil, and natural gas. As mentioned, carbon dioxide is released when fossil fuels are burned. Burning other things like wood, trees, solid waste, this will also release carbon dioxide into the air. One critical fact to make a note of is that even though we're increasing the amount of carbon dioxide in the air by burning these things, it's not that we're making more carbon. It's just that we're moving carbon that was in that coal underground, or that was in that tree, and releasing that carbon into the air. So it's moving around and recycling carbon and carbon dioxide throughout this carbon cycle. It's a continuous circular process going on. Let's watch this short video that will be talking a little bit about the carbon cycle and how there's different rates of carbon movement.
A banana and a chunk of coal both store carbon, yet they are as different as can be. The banana is sweet and delicious. The coal is not. Both were made by plants and store energy from the sun and carbon gas from the air. But carbon in the banana is young and fast, while carbon in the coal is old and slow. NASA launches satellites into Earth orbit to help us watch fast and slow carbon cycling. Higher amounts of carbon dioxide in the air are shown in yellow. Growing plants on land are shaded green. Plants use the sun's energy to remove carbon dioxide from the air to make biomass, such as the banana. Growing plants remove carbon dioxide from the air in spring and summer. In winter, all living things release carbon dioxide back into the air. Some carbon cycles quickly, moving through living things and returning to the atmosphere. Carbon in the banana is young, fast carbon. Just weeks ago, the banana was carbon gas in the air. And hours after you eat it, you breathe out the same carbon back into the air around you. Other carbon cycle slowly, getting buried underground or deep in the ocean. Plants took the coal carbon out of the air hundreds of millions of years ago, long before there were people. That carbon has been locked up ever since, and would stay locked up if we didn't dig it up and burn it. We use coal and other fossil fuels to power our lights and factories, heat our homes, and move around. When this old carbon is burned, we release carbon gas to the air, and can also release black carbon or soot, here shown in purple over the Earth at night, brightest where most carbon is released. Black carbon in the northern hemisphere comes mainly from coal and forest fires. In South America, Africa, and Indonesia, it comes from burning fields and forests that may have stored carbon for hundreds of years. The carbon cycle is balanced if carbon released into the air is the same as what's taken up by the ocean and land. But lately, people have been putting old, slow carbon into the air faster than nature can cycle it back into storage. Why do we care about the carbon cycle? Carbon dioxide acts like a blanket and traps heat, leaving the Earth's surface. Too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere warms the Earth and leads to other changes, such as melting ice caps and rising sea level. Each of us has a carbon footprint, the amount of carbon we put into the air through the choices we make about food, transportation, and energy. Find out what you can do to reduce your carbon footprint today.
So now that we've watched that video, let's take a closer look at these two different categories of pathways. We have slow carbon pathways, where carbon stays for hundreds, thousands, even millions of years before moving to a different location. We also have fast carbon pathways, where carbon stays for a matter of weeks, months, maybe a few years, and cycles very quickly from one spot to the next. So let's talk about the three main slow carbon pathways. The first one being the formation of fossil fuels. That's a key word here, formation, because as we learned, that takes millions of years to make additional fossil fuels. Also the formation of something called limestone. Limestone is formed from the shells of dead marine life that get compacted and converted into this stone. It stays there then for a long period of time. Some of our monuments, like the Washington Monument, are built of limestone. And additionally, not quite as slow as the first two, carbon can get trapped in long-lived trees for hundreds or, in some cases, thousands of years. Once you've committed these three to memory, anything else that's a carbon pathway is a fast pathway. One of those would be the burning of fossil fuels and the burning of trees and garbage and other biomass. Things like ethanol. Cellular respiration and photosynthesis going on every day, all the time. Very fast pathway. And decay and decomposition. These are actually sort of subcategories of cellular respiration because these are performed by decomposers that are doing cellular respiration to break down dead materials and release carbon dioxide. So, before humans started digging up fossil fuels, the amount of carbon dioxide that was being released into the air was roughly balanced by the amount that was being pulled back out of the air. Out of those two green arrows on the left, which one do you think represents photosynthesis? If you guessed this arrow here, you're correct. Photosynthesis is the main factor that is taking carbon dioxide out of our atmosphere and storing it in plant life or other photosynthetic organisms. Once humans started to dig up fossil fuels, though, and burn them, we now began to release much more carbon dioxide in the air, more than that can be brought back down through photosynthesis. So that means currently the carbon cycle is imbalanced. What evidence do we have that suggests that human actions are largely responsible for this imbalance of the carbon cycle? Well, here we can look back at the release of carbon into the air by burning fossil fuels. And you can see back at the year 1800, there was almost nothing. We were not burning many fossil fuels. Our population was much smaller. And then it rapidly increased as technology and population growth occurred dramatically in the centuries to follow. If there's more carbon dioxide in the air now than there used to be, that means we also have more present in the water, because the higher concentration in the air, the more of that actually dissolves into the water. And why is that important? Why does it matter if carbon dioxide dissolves in the water and there's more of it there? Well, when carbon dioxide dissolves in the water, it forms a relatively weak acid. You do not need to know all of these details. Don't get overwhelmed by this picture here. But just knowing that when CO2 dissolves in water, it forms an acid, and that makes the ocean, more acidic. That has impacts that affect the shells of different creatures and other negative side effects for organisms living in the water, but we're just focusing on the fact that it makes it more acidic. We're going to introduce something called the pH scale. If you're not familiar with it, it's a way to measure acidity. Typically, you find the pH scale going from 0 all the way up to 14. I would put 7 right in the middle. 7 is what we call neutral, not an acid, not a base. Anything lower than 7, we consider to be an acid. Anything higher than 7, we consider to be a base. So what that means is as carbon dioxide dissolves in water and causes it to be more acidic, that means the pH actually decreases. So a lower pH number correlates, or corresponds, I should say, to a stronger acid. That's all for this topic. Let's talk to you guys next time.